like to understand what is medical humanities. So, just to give you a brief definition of medical humanities, I strongly believe that it is a highly complex knowledge system subjected to constant definition and redefinition. Medical humanities is conceived as a plural and multidisciplinary epistemic sphere that constantly engages with discourses pertaining to medicine, disease, health, and well being. So, to begin, many a times I have discussed with scholars, faculty members who say that what is medical humanities? It is a critical discipline. Is it a discipline in itself? No, medical humanities is an approach to understand a particular phenomenon. And more specifically, when we are talking about this phenomenon, we want to understand the life itself, the human life, and how this life is being shared with other animate and inanimate entities in relationship to man. So, when we are talking about medical humanities, it is not a discipline in itself. Rather, it draws on a range of disciplines like sociology, philosophy, social work, philosophy, and any number of other disciplines like science and technology as an epistemic sphere in order to understand how the life and more specifically how the human engagement with this world is always in a process of transition. I'll not say that it cannot be defined. Human life is always in a process of progression. And when we are talking about this life, human life, we cannot exclude the other life forms with whom the human life is always in the process of interaction, right? So when we talk about medical humanities, it is a complex discipline to understand the human life that is under the lens of medicalization. And in today's world, when we have progressed from medicalization to biomedicalization, we are talking about the technocratic understanding of the human life and nature. So, Victoria Betts and Sam Goodman argued it is a malleability of the term medical humanities that make it a definition so problematic and arguably even unnecessary to concretize. So, this we should be very much aware of, that we cannot have a definite definition of medical humanities because it draws on a range of discipline, it draws on a range of uh, phenomena pertaining to human life in order to define or in order to try to explain what it is. So there is no clear cut definition about medical humanities. And more and many a times we will be talking about medical humanities, sometimes we'll be talking about health humanities, and more specifically nowadays, and in fact I also emphasize that I don't do only medical or health humanities, rather I emphasize on critical medical humanities. So, when we talk about critical medical humanities, we are talking about the critical thought process, the critical theories that we have, for example, gender, race, post-humanism, then effect theory, and a range of other theories that we could draw on in order to understand how the life is evolving in this biosphere. And more specifically, when we are talking about this evolution, we are trying to understand this evolution, this transition, this process through its interaction with the biotechnological world, right? So when we are talking about the biotechnological world, we are talking about the different technologies that are being used to understand the biology, and not only to understand and define the biology, but also to configure and reconfigure the biology. So, when we talk about the three principles that underline the medical or the health humanities, first of all, we say that it is a broad and inclusive manner. So, why I said broad and inclusive? Because on the one hand, we cannot be prejudiced, we cannot be culturally influenced when we are talking about a particular phenomenon under the scope of medical humanities. We need to be, to an extent which is quite not possible, but try to be unprejudiced, try to be unbiased when we are reading it. But at the same time, we need to be inclusive because we cannot understand a phenomenon, or we cannot understand a particular aspect without taking into consideration the social, cultural, political, and economic aspects that influence that particular study. So That's the reason when we are talking about health humanities, medical humanities, critical medical humanities, we are talking about a very broad but at the same time a very inclusive domain, and we need to historicize it. That is very, very important. All of us, I believe, we are familiar with the concept of new historicism. So when we are talking about this particular approach, what we are emphasizing on is that we cannot understand any knowledge system without placing it into the structure in which it is embedded. So when we are talking about a structure, for example, today we are talking about John Keats. When we talk about John Keats, we many of us we did read Ode on a Grecian Urn, Lamia, the Ode to Apollo, and a range of other creative works of Keats. Sometimes it is said that we should not be decoding the text too much. We should not be very much influenced by the historical factor. Rather, we should be reading the text as it is. But when it comes to the approach of medical humanities, it does try to understand the cultural, the political, the other social, political, economic factors that might have influenced the creation of the text, right? So, and thirdly, and more systematically, if we need to articulate it, it tries to understand the relationship between medicine, arts, humanities, and the kind of constant reciprocation and the exchange of the knowledge system that happened within these three domains. So with this note, I would like to say that when we are talking about medical humanities or doing medical humanities, so it is a kind of methodology in the medical humanities that take into consideration theories, practices, impact, and representation of the interface between human life and medical organizations. So, when we talk about medical organization, we are talking about it as a kind of institution that is reconfiguring our life, that is systematizing our life, that is defining our life. So, in this very tone in which we have started to understand medical humanities and how we engage with medical humanities, I would like to emphasize Keats' plays at a time that was highly not volatile, but always in a phase of transition. Why transition? Because it was a time when culturally, epistemologically, when I talk about epistemologically, I'm talking about the knowledge system. Everything was in a process of flux, in a process of transition, because science as a concept, it was rising at the time. So here I have said to you, age of reason or the enlightenment. Many of us are familiar with this very time phase and what happened at the time, because it was the age of reason. It was just an age that preceded the romantic period. But when we are talking about this periodization, we should also be very much aware this periodic structure that we have, that enlightenment, age of reason, romantic period, Victorian period. This is designed in order to help us understand about the different time frame, but they cannot be treated as watertight compartment. It cannot be understood, it cannot be said that okay, age of reason with all its impact, cultural evolution, or the epistemology that it did generate in its time did not influence the romantic period. Rather, it is a kind of enmeshment between the different periods that should be taken into consideration when we are trying to understand in how they have been influencing and responding each other when we are talking about the period. So when we talk about the age of reason, it was said that truth could only be achieved through the notion of fact, empiricism, right? That was very much emphasized at the time. Experiences, we should be able to understand truth, and science is one of the mediums through which truth could be achieved. And when we are talking about science, science is all about facts. So without fact we cannot claim anything. But when you are talking about the romantic period, most of the time in our classrooms we say that it is just the contrast of the preceding nation, preceding era. But that is not the case. Rather, it was a time when a range of thoughts were in friction with each other. So that we will be talking about. So whenever we talk about romantic period, we say that it is the period when literature was emphasizing more on imagination, more on speculation, more on contemplation. So it was a flight from reason. That was the particular understanding that was given to us. But when we are talking about kids, right? So many a times there is a kind of mystery behind why kids did not continue his practice as a medical practitioner. So this is one of the quotes that I have taken from the Journal of Medical Biography that beautifully says that kids, the promising doctor from Edmonton, never practiced medicine but lies buried far from home in that rather beautiful Protestant cemetery in the Rome. So it's a surgeon apothecary. So I will be explaining what this apothecary is all about. The surgeon apothecary John Keats, of his own volition, never practiced for a single day. But it is quite we all have this question that why Keats did not continue, or why, in spite of having all the qualification that I will be listing out in my futures in my following slides, why didn't Keats actually apply his knowledge? What could have stopped? There are many theories behind it. Many say that Keats was very much moved by the bloodsheds, or the kind of the time that he devoted in his surgery. So he was an apprentice to a surgeon, and he had to devote a lot of time yeah, with the surgeon, and he was very much moved, and he had a kind of repugnance towards the blood that he had been witnessing throughout. So he wanted to take a break. So, but many says that he was very much uncertain about his knowledge, whether it is possible for him to practice as a surgeon, to what extent will be able to do justice to his profession. And there was also episodes in many of the works by biographers, many of the uh, works of authors who actually have tried to read or try to understand Keats' life. They say that the Keats actually was contemplating on initiating his medical profession, and he wanted to start as a ship surgeon, and he wanted to go to South America or India in order to practice. But it was the time 1819. We should be knowing that life was pretty short in terms of its duration, right? So he did not survive for a long time. So the time when he was contemplating about initiating his profession as a surgeon, it was 1819, and soon after that, after 2 3 years, he could not survive. So with that very note, this is a very quick overview of the poet's life. So many, we have an assumption that probably he belonged to a very poor family. But in contrast to that, biographer like Celine Taylor, he says that argues that in contrast to the common assumption, John Keats belonged to a financially well-to-do family. So, and more specifically, when it comes to his family, his mother's family, the Jennings, were really financially strong, and his mother actually the first phase of her life, when she married Thomas Keat, the father of John Keat, the couple really had a good life. So yes, so Francis Jennings, at the age of the 19, got married to 20 years old Thomas Keats, and the couple gave birth to three sons and a daughter. So many of us know about them: John, Tom, George, and Fanny. So the whole family was happy, one enjoying close relationship. And when it comes to the foundation period of Keats' life, which is very important for all of us to know, is that it was the time when actually Keats was considered to be a bookworm. And from when we read Keats' creative works, we need to get ourselves familiarized with the Greco-Roman classical mythology. We cannot read Keats if we are not very much familiar with the mythology, the tale of the Greco-Roman time. So from where it did emerge, it emerged in his school time, and he actually was a person who used to devote a lot of time reading about the romantic literature and the myths and the tales of the Greek and the Roman period. And this actually very much influenced him. And more specifically, there was a beautiful symmetry in his training, in his formative period of his life. So when he was as a school student, when he was in the boarding of Enfield Academy, at the time he was nurturing himself with the understanding of myths and fables. And later on, yeah, when he was in when he was as a when he was working under Thomas Hammer, if I'm not very wrong, that surgeon apothecary under whom he actually have devoted 5 years to know about the medicine. At the time, he was actually formally trained in botany, and he had to devote a lot of time in the field works, in the field visit, and he was deeply in touch with the famous botanist William Salisbury. So this very training period, right, he completed a course in botany, attended field exercise as part of his training in Guy's Hospital, and more specifically in the schooling time when he was actually working in the schools. Sorry, not working, when he was studying in the school. At the time, his love for romantic literature, and he's very much keen to know more about the Greco-Roman classical myths. They really contributed in his understanding of the literary world and the world of the science together, right? So with that, he was formed, but there was a disjunction in his happy family life. As I said to you, that his childhood days were very beautiful, to be more precise, but it did not last long. With the death of his father and immediately the death of his grandmother, and a kind of, it is always said, it's a kind of abrupt decision taken by his mother, that his mother got married to William Rowling. Then the life changed for the family. And when grandfather died, he died with a very badly drafted will that actually led to their financial crunch. And this is one juncture of his life when he was really, really struggling. And as the elder brother of the family, he also had to take the responsibility of the family. And with his mother, the health was also one of the issues that greatly to an extent to an extent moved the kids in his early phase of the life. So as I say to you, his mother, and many of us might be knowing that kids did when it comes to John Keats, he did witness death multiple times, first in the form of his mother, who it was said died of tuberculosis, and secondly, he witnessed the death of his very dear brother Tom, who also died. And it was said that although the diagnosis of the disease is not very much confirmed, but he too died because of tuberculosis. So when he was treating his mother, the surgeon, who was Thomas Hammond, was the one who was visiting them frequently. And this is the man, the surgeon apothecary, who actually inspired kids to come to the world of medicine. And when it comes to kids, he was deeply influenced, and to an extent, he thought that medicine could be one of the domains through which he could actually heal the ailment of the people, because pain is very much deeply connected to kids life. He witnessed pain, he witnessed death multiple times, and therefore he was a person, he thought that it could be medicine could be one of the ways to release the humanity from the pain, from the death that is so harsh. So this is one of the statements, but not the statement, that it is just an interpretation of what actually drove Key to the world of the medicine. So when it comes to his medical training, 5 years of apprenticeship under the surgeon apothecary Thomas Hammond. So I should also be emphasizing here that Kits was actually functioning at a time of transition. Why I do say so? Because it was the time in between the birth of the clinic and the discovery of the cell. So we don't we are the kit was actually in between. And when we talk about the birth of the clinic, we are not talking about the birth of the clinic as defined by Michel Foucault, because Michel Foucault has a completely different understanding of the birth of the clinic, where he was emphasizing on the birth of the clinic at the time of the yeah, in France. That was the notion he had. But there are historians, and more specifically, I'll be citing a few of them here. They say that London actually was an emerging medical domain, where clinic as a concept, medical institutions, and the teaching of the doctors were very much happening at the time when Kit was very much active. So, when you talk about the second phase that influenced, attended Borough Medical School of the United Hospitals of Guy's and St. Thomas's in London. So, this also impacted attracted him. And then 8 months of clinical attendance in the wards of the two hospital. And when I'm talking about the two hospitals, the United Hospitals of Guys and the St. Thomas's in London. Appointment as a surgeon dresser, and when we talk about attended course on anatomy and the operation of surgery taught by Ashley Cooper, he was a surgeon at the time, learned morbid anatomy and dissection with Joseph Henry Green. So from this particular list, you can see that he was a man who was well versed in the world of medicine. And most of the time when you Google search, Kit is said that the poet physician, but more specifically, Kit is not only a poet physician, rather he was a surgeon apothecary. There is a difference between that, because at the time when Kit was getting his medical training, at the time there were three divisions in the medical profession itself. The first division was that of a physician, the second division was that of a surgeon, and the third division was that of a surgeon apothecary. A surgeon apothecary is the one who had the license to practice medicine. And when it comes to John Keats, he did receive the license to practice medicine, and it was stated that in the year 1815, under yeah, under the Apothecary Act of 1815, he completed the medical training, received the diploma to start his practice as a surgeon. So he was well versed. So when it comes to a surgeon apothecary, he is a person who is very much knowledgeable of anatomy. He is a person who knows the very mechanism of diagnosis, or the way it was said, the semiotic prognosis. That means the way to read the different features of of disease as it gets manifested in the human body. And he is the person who has the license to treat, and people can visit this person in order to get themselves treated if they have the money, in order to get the support of the medical profession. So now, when it comes to, yes, as I said to you, that he had also an inspiration to be a sick surgeon, to travel to South America or India to heal the diseased bodies. So, when we talk about his understanding, as I say to you, that it was a phase of transition. It was a phase of transition because when it comes to the medical world, science as a discipline, I should be telling you that 1800, 1801 was the time when biology as a discipline was incepted. And more specifically, when you talk about the influence of biology, it is a science of life. So when we talk about science of life, it tries to unveil the mystery behind what is life in itself, and how a body decays, how a body burns, what are the organizations that actually fills the engine of a body. So most of the time it was considered that the human body is kind of machine, but many says that no, it is more than a machine because it is conscious, it has soul. So there were a numerous strange of thoughts that did emerge at the time. And when it comes to Kids' work did capture these debates, these confusions, these mysteries about unveiling what it means to be alive, what is life in itself. And here, when we are talking about kids, I would like to say that more than kids never had a very kids a notion of life, or the way he tries to capture the debate on life, that actually was very much covered, because he always did it through his poetry, through his creative works. So this very notion of life and its debate on what is life is all about is very much explicitly captured in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that actually talks about this very debate, that is life just an assemblage of matter, or its life is just that you have organized the matter and then it starts emanating, or is life something that is externally infused into the body, thereby you cross the phase from being inanimate to animate. So in the very beginning of my session, I did ask you that how many of you are aware of this debate of the vitalists and the materialistic notion of the life. This is very, very important, because without knowing this debate, without knowing the understanding of what is life, how the human body was perceived, what are the different discourses that emerge and interpreted this very mysterious notion of the life, we cannot unfold the creative works of the creators of that time. And here we are more specifically focusing on John Keats. So now, I will be coming to this poem, Ode to Apollo, and interconnectivity between arts and medicine. And I'll just take you to this particular slide, and then we will go back to the previous slide where I have that particular stanza. So, when it comes to the Ode to Apollo, the time when John Keats wrote the poem itself was very, very significant, because when it comes to John Keats, he wrote the poem when he was in the process of completing his apprenticeship under Thomas Hammond, the surgeon. And when it comes to his 1815, when he was writing, he was also looking forward to his formal medical training at Guy's Hospital. And when it comes to many historians, for example, she is Almedia, in her book on Keats and romantic medicine, she says that the very reference of Apollo has multiple connotations for Keats. It's not just he is praising or he is showing his reverence for the Greco-Roman god. Rather, there are many underlying connotations for his very creation of the poet, that actually a poem that actually showcases his notion of the very medical profession in itself. So now, when we are talking about the medical profession, I'll just read the 3 points that I have. The Ode to Apollo was produced in February 1815, a phase when Keats was an apprentice at Hammond Surgery and was looking forward to his formal medical training in Guy's Hospital. Secondly, the creation of the creative piece showcasing its reference to Apollo has multiple connotations, and more specifically, it showcases the interconnectivity between art, medicine, and pestilence. So, when we talk about the Greco-Roman figure, the god, the Apollo, he is not only a god of arts. He is a god who resembles arts, medicine, pestilence. And when you talk about pestilence, it is the spread of the disease. And he is also, so when it comes, he is not a one figure. It's not that he is a unified figure who has just one task to do. Rather, he is a figure who has multiple tasks, who is actually evoked for multiple purposes. He is a man of fine arts. He is a medical practitioner. He also is a god who actually brings sorrows and sadness and disease, and he is also a person who purges the body out of the disease. So it is believed, and it is very much argued by the kids scholars, that when it comes to the ode to Apollo, it is not just a very simple evocation, or it's not a simple reverence for the Greek god. Rather, it has the very underlying principle of what medicine should be. And it is also the time where kids actually emphasizes on medical ethics, the humanitarianism. So when it comes to kids practice, it is very much identified by the kids scholars, that when he talks about medical profession, he always wanted to talk about medical profession and it's very strong the association with humanities and arts, that it is not a profession that could be deciphered, that could be understood by the factual by the facts, or by the simple decoding of the semiotics of the diseases, as the disease grows, or as disease gets manifested in the body. Rather, you need an eye of a foreseer, a person who can predict, a person who can foresee, a person who has an intellectual capability that is a combination of facts and imagination. So at that time, he strongly emphasized on the point that a medical practitioner is not only a person who can master the discipline by being isolating himself to the field of medicine. Rather, he strongly believes that just like Apollo the god, who is not one person, rather multiple persona, who is a god, who is a doctor, who is an artist, who is also a person who gives you the disease as well as heals you from disease, is the perspective that the medical world should be inheriting in order to understand this very diverse profession of the medical world. Right. So this is one point that talks about the symmetry between the art and medicine. And when it comes to John Keats, he strongly believes in it, that when you are talking about medicine and when you're talking about healing the human body, you cannot understand your profession when you are not very much aware of the ethics of healing a body, the medical ethics that prior poetized humanitarian the perspective. It's not only the fact. So here, Almeida, as I have heavily referred to her work here, argues that Apollo is Keats' presiding deity, who has contributed in the self-fashioning of the poet's notion of medical practice that should demonstrate a symmetry between art and medicine. Now, when it comes to and this could be one of the reasons many Keats scholar they do argue that probably Keats uncertainty about his knowledge, because he is knowledgeable, but at the same time he says that knowledge is not finite. You cannot limit knowledge by one discourse, or you cannot limit knowledge to by learning a set of disciplines. Rather, it is infinite, and there is always an ambiguity, and thereby I haven't used the term here in my slide, but I would like to emphasize on this concept that we all are familiar with as English as students of English literature: negative capability. Kids emphasized on this very notion of uncertainty. It is against the very notion of rationality, empiricism, that says that truth could be achieved only through facts. Truth could be achieved only by offering a very rational, logical explanation to the facts that we are that encompasses us. Rather, when it comes to kids, he says that our knowledge system should always be taken with with a pinch of uncertainty, by acknowledging the mystery and the divinity that is always there when we are talking about our universe. Because universe cannot be confined to one discourse. Universe cannot be categorized. Universe cannot be explained in a very taxonomical understanding. Why I am explaining it? Because as I have said to you a minute back, that it was also the time when biology as a discipline was emerging. 1801 is very important, because the discipline was incepted, and this discipline was actually gearing towards understanding the mystery of life. And there, when we are talking about a very microscopic perspective of life, what is microscopic? Finite. We are trying to slice a living organism, and thereby we would like to understand the mystery behind the living organism by just studying the organization, the structure of the body that is put under the microscope. But when it comes to kids, he says that this microscopic view will be limiting our knowledge system, and our knowledge horizon could be enlarged only when we do acknowledge that our knowledge could also be finite, because the infinity of the universe could not be confined in the microscopic view, right? So with this very perspective, when it comes to kids, he is a follower of romantic medicine. So it is most of the time when we are in our English classroom, we do emphasize that romantic literature is all about the revolution that we perceived in the field of literary work, right? But when it comes to the romantic literature, it actually emphasizes on a particular philosophy, right? And it did have a strong impact on artistic and political perspective of the society in which Keats was residing. So when we are defining romantic medicine, is a significant component of a larger artistic and political movement called romanticism, and it emphasizes the cohesion between facts and imagination. Foregrounds romantic way of interpreting and contemplating about the vital concerns of medicine. So when we are talking about the vital concerns of the medicine, I'll quickly talk what it talks about: life, disease, pain, perfection. So these were the key concerns of romantic medicine, and we all are very much aware that when you read Keats, right, when you read John Keats, you cannot just read Keats without having due awareness of the kind of pain that he actually captures in his words. He many a times when he is talking about, if you read the poem, the La Belle de, I'm sorry, I forgot the name, the La Belle Demoiselles Mercy, the poem which we all might have in our college curriculum as well. There he talks about the pain and pleasure of love. There also he talks about the mystery. There also he talks about a kind of elusiveness that is there that cannot be deciphered. And when he's talking about love, it is also very much entangled with the notion of disease. When he's talking about the pain and love are always hand in hand with each other. And more specifically, when he's talking about life in itself. So when you read Keats, for example, Ode on a Grecian Urn, most of the time this particular poem is very much celebrated because of the immortality of the art. But most of them, but the recent scholars, they say that it is a paradoxical explanation of the art, and I would like to take little time to explain this here, because we will be listening to the ode on a Grecian Urn. I have the because when you listen to the poem, you'll be able to understand what the creative person is trying to convey. Because I also strongly believe that it is not just a very explicit celebration of the art, rather it offers a very penetrative view on the very notion of what life is all about. So now, when I say to you that at the time, the romantic medicine, it actually talks about an organic unity. But when we are talking about romantic medicine, it is one of the strands of thoughts among other thoughts that were governing the time, and more specifically, the medical world. And in this particular time, there are two debates that are very important for us: the debate on the interdisciplinary debate of life by John Abernathy and William Lawrence. Sorry, I have misspelled. It's a typo. Kindly excuse me for here is William William Lawrence. So they are the two surgeons who actually propose two different perspectives of life. On one hand, when it comes to John Abernathy, he says that life is life is always in a state of flux. There is no binary between life and death, organic and inorganicity. Rather, life is only a state of temporary prevention of putrefaction and dissolution. So, when a body is alive, it is alive because it is in a position to stop the opposing forces that is always trying to decompose the body. So life is always a very transitory phase, it is not permanent. So, and more specifically, when it comes to Abernathy, he also says that life does not emerge just because of the from the material world. Rather, it is an external force that is infused to the body, and thereby the body transforms itself from being inanimate to animate. So this is one. So life is an interplay of opposing force. So the life is not the one state, rather it is a multiple state that keeps changing its form based on the energy that is circulated. And this particular notion of life as a very hybrid phenomenon. So when we talk about, probably most of the time we believe that life is a static concept, right? That life is this, life is something which is alive, and when you are dead, you are not alive. So there is a kind of binary. But when it comes to Abernethy and the philosophers and the natural philosophy that is proposed by Schelling, the German philosopher, and is also one of the pioneers of the romantic medicine, they all say that life is culturally informed. Our notion of life is not life as it comes under the microscope, but in order to understand the mystery of life, we need to surrender ourselves, our intellectuality to mystery, to the unreliability, to the uncertainty, and then only life could be understood. But if the very notion of understanding is always in a kind of it is always a kind of understanding that is partial. You cannot understand life in its totality. And more specifically, when they are talking about life, they say that life, since it is not finite, since it is infinite, life itself is monstrous. No, the energy, the energy that it talks about is so monstrous that you need to have a sublime perspective in order to cognize the very nature of life, the very energy of life that we deal with. But in contrast to that, when it comes to William Lawrence, Lawrence says that life is nothing but a materialistic phenomenon. Life can emerge only when a body is organized, and from the body, from that organized structure, the life emanates. So there is nothing that could be bestowed on the body in order to get it alive. Rather, it is very much within the matter that gives birth to life. So this is the materialistic notion of life, where matter is considered to be the soul of life. In contrast to that, vitalists, they say that no, it's not only the matter. You cannot limit your perspective of life only to the body, the finite body that you are viewing. Rather, life is much beyond the body, and in order to understand life, you need to release yourself from the bodily confinement, and thereby take the very notion of negative capability, that is uncertainties and mysteries, to understand life. With that perspective, when, as I say to you, that this is a very interesting article. Many of you could read it if you are very much interested. This is The Monster in the Rainbow, Keats and the Science of Life by Gigante, Dennis Gigante. So this is a particular article that actually delved deep into this debate on the life, vitalist and the materialistic understanding of life. It's due to the time constraint. I will not be able to explain all the aspects, but there are many aspects. For example, when it comes to Abernethy, so slowly he actually took a very religious perspective towards life. That was not the agenda of kids and the people who actually talked about romantic medicine. So now, so, against the materialism represented by Lawrence, vitalist in the work of Hunter. So, Thomas Hunter was the first person who talked about, who wanted to unveil the mystery of life, sought to define life or science of life beyond the mechanistic fear of Newtonian science that had dominated the philosophy of the first half of the 18th century. So, what is Newtonian science? So, when you talk about Newton, they try to have a very objective person. It's a kind of mathematical explanation. So, 2 into 2 is equal to 4. But when it comes to kids says that this very mechanistic, this very machinic, this very logical, rational explanation of life that you are proposing is actually marring the beauty of the nature. Nature is is far beyond this very mathematical calculation that you are proposing. And with that perspective, we have this ode on a Grecian art. Before I explain that how this particular poem that was so-called considered to be a piece of art that actually focuses on the immortality or the very beauty of art is paradoxical. Let's listen to a few stanzas as it is as I'll be playing it here. Just
Ode on a
yeah.
Grecian Urn by John Keats. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape, of deities or mortals, or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal yet. Do not grieve, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs, that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. And happy melodist, unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young, all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these come?
So now, let's begin. Uh, Yeah. So when we talk about Ode on a Grecian Art, as I said to you, that it is a poem that is interpreted by the recent Kit scholar as a poem that actually talks about the very paradoxical notion of life. So when you talk about life, yes, apparently this poem does talk about the immortality of art, that how art is beautiful, where you do not have death, you do not have pain. It is a piece that could actually, it is beyond time. So it is immortal. But when it comes to the Keats scholar, they say that we should not be forgetting the fact that when it comes to Keats, he is a medical practitioner. He has a particular perspective towards life and a lens to understand life that dive deep beneath the skin. Because when we are talking about kids, his very profession, his very knowledge of surgery, his very under that very training itself has trained him to live beyond the apparent. So when it comes to oral aggression on apparently the immortality that is celebrated in this poem actually talks about a very paradoxical notion of life. But is it the immortality that Keats is highlighting, or it's the life that is being celebrated? I personally feel that this is a poem that celebrates the beauty of life with all its uncertainties. And as I say to you, that when it comes to the vitalist and Keats being one of the romantic medical, one of the followers of the romantic medicine as a knowledge system, they never ever have considered life and death as two separate units that needs to be mourned. Rather, they say that life and death are are a part of one journey. It's an organic unity. So when you are leaving, you are definitely going to die, and when you are dying, again you are going to live in a different form. So when it comes to this very binaristic explanation of life, as it was proposed by the empiricists, where they have talked about animate and inanimate in a very binaristic way, that very binary was challenged by Keats and many others. So when it comes to the particular poem that we are discussing here, so he uses the very concept of foster child. So when we talk about the foster child, so thou still unravaged bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time. So he's talking about this unrealisticness, but at the same time this beauty that is there, but at the same time the beauty that is not as beautiful as life. And when he talks about this beauty of life, you can see that this particular poem talks about a time that is frozen, the time that is not moving, and when you are still, when you are static, you are dead. So this depth actually talks about a paradoxical notion of life that should be celebrated. So he says that both lover never ever can't thou kiss, thou winning near the goal, yet do not grieve. She cannot fade though thou hast not thy bliss, forever will thou love and she be fair. So this immortality is put in contrast with the mortality, but the beauty of mortality by telling that all breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrow and cloud, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. So you may think that yes, many of us have interpreted it as a kind of mourning the demise, mourning the very the mortality of the dead body. But when we connect it with the kind of theory and the philosophy of the life that was celebrated by the naturalist philosopher Schelling and others, and Keats being one of the members of that particular thought process who did witness the debate between William Lawrence and John Abernethy, and a person who actually personally knew John Abernethy, it was strongly argued that his notion of life cannot be static, cannot be binaristic. Rather, when it comes to the ode on a Grecian urn, it is a paradoxical explanation of what life is not. Life is beautiful, but at the same time, life is very, very monstrous. So, when it comes to one particular concept that was very much proposed, and I'll be explaining it in my remaining slide, that life is conceived to be an energy that is externally infused to the matter to transform it from animate to inanimate, as I have already said. But at the same time, Ode on a Grecian urn showcases the hollowness that implies both the potential and the perfection of creation. So, when it comes to this particular concept, we also have a concept of romantic monstrosity. So, when you talk about the monstrosity, this very notion of romantic monstrosity that we are talking about is not negative. Rather, it is a sublime beauty that the finiteness of the observation cannot capture. The finite observation of the science cannot, the finite observation of science can only be offering a very taxonomical or dissecting understanding of life, when life is separated from each other, where we are offered a very discrete view of life. life. But in contrast to it, when it comes to life in its totality, life could only be experienced because of the sublimity it has. So, with that very perspective, with that very argument, we also have one more creative work here, that is of Lamia. I believe that many of you might have read, and if you haven't, you please read Lamia, because when it comes to Lamia, it offers a very hybridized understanding of beauty, and more specifically, as we talk about, as romantic monstrosity. So when it comes to Lamia, just use one photo. I haven't used it because of the copyright infringement, but I just thought of using the website here. Um, if at all it is there, then I can show you, or else I cannot. Uh, okay, fine. I have just deleted that particular site right now. So when it comes to Lamia, it's a she's a serpent, right? And when you talk, and I'll just read the way she's explained here. She was a guardian shape of dazzling hue, vermilion, spotted, golden, green, and blue. Striped like a zebra, freckled like a bird, eyed like a peacock, and all crimson bird, and full of silver moons, and that as she bred, dissolved or brighter shone or interwreathed. Dear lusher with the gloomier tapestry, so rainbow sided, touched with miseries. She seemed at once some penanced lady elf, some demon mistress, and the demon self. Upon her crest she wore a vanished fire, sprinkled with stars like Aridan tire. Her head was serpent, but arbiter sweet and sweet as honey. Her eyes were fire, flaming fire, flaming fire. And for her eyes, what could such eyes do here but weep and weep that they were born so fair? So when you reach Lamia, you'll be able to see that Lamia is a very hybridized being, like any other mythological creature. She does not have any finite body. Rather, she becomes an assemblage of many colors and many figures, and she is a combination of everything. And when it comes to the Lamia, many scholars have said that Lamia is actually the representation of nature as it is. When you talk about nature, it is an organic unity. You cannot offer a very discrete perspective of Lamia. And when we, I have I'll be taking you back to this particular article, "The Monster in the Rainbow: Kids and the Science of Life." There, it is said that when it comes to the Newtonian science is actually marring the very beauty of the nature. And here I will be just reading the first line as it was stated. Kids agreed with Charles Lamb that Newton had destroyed all the poetry of the rainbow by reducing it to the prismatic color. So when it comes to this particular poem that I'm explaining just now, the poem that is Lamia, it is a rainbow figure, a color, a figure, a beautiful the image that is actually assembling all the beauties of the nature. And since it is so much of life in itself, that it was perceived as monstrous by many, when you are not able to demarcate between the different colors, the figures, and as it is, we are not able to demarcate between human, you cannot demarcate it as animal, you cannot demarcate as a serpent. So it is the combination of everything. She is the combination of everything. So it is very much interpreted by many the scholars or kids that when it comes to Lamia, the Lamia is actually the representation of nature. And when Kids is portraying Lamia, when he is defining Lamia, and the choice of words that he has here, it is very much influenced by his understanding of the knowledge system of science as it was proposed by the natural philosophy. It is also very much it is very much influenced by the understanding of life. It is very much influenced by the understanding of a kind of approach towards life that is in contrast to the taxonomical or the dissection of the life as it is proposed by the science and the mathematics and the art and the empiricist philosopher. So when it comes to the kids, we cannot actually take the kids all the creative works. That is just not possible. But when we talk about kids, we should be explaining kids, we should be understanding kids through through the knowledge system that actually led to the creation of Kids the author, sorry, Kids the creative, the person. So when you talk about the romantic medicines or the scholars of the romantic medicine, and who have been very much delving with the life of kids, and to what extent the creative work of kids actually is being influenced by the scientific discourse of its time, they strongly believe that kids cannot be understand, his work cannot be understand if we do not contextualize kids and kids work in the structure in which they were born. So they were born in a time when the biology, they were as a discipline was incepted. And when we talk about biology, biology is the science of life. But at the same time, with the understanding of life that was proposed by one school of thought was vehemently objected by the other school of thought. They do not want to have a very empiricistic or a finite understanding of life, rather life as it is in its totality, life that cannot offer a very hierarchical explanation, rather life that celebrates the monstrosity that is very much in the womb of nature. Right. So in this 1 hour talk, I don't know to what extent I'm able to give you all an explanation of how art, medicine, and kids' life and kids his training as a medical practitioner, and more specifically, and surgeon apothecary, they have really influenced his creation. But yes, when it comes to the medical humanities, we strongly believe that we should be reading kids through the perspective of the scientific discourse and the notion of the life as it was proposed by the different streams of thoughts. So these are the few readings that I thought that you all, if you are very much interested, you can definitely go through it. So one is the Romantic Medicine and John Keats. This I also have referred when I was making my presentation. The another one is Romantic Autopsy, the literary form and medical reading by Arden Hegel, and Romanticism, Medicine and the Poet's Body by James Robert Allard. So these are the few, not the reading, but a few that I have enlisted and I have referred to when I did explain how the notion of life was very much what to say, influenced Keats' selection of the words and the portrayal of the mythological characters that he took in order to let the society know what is happening in the medical world. So he was very much in connection, or he might be considered to be an interface between the medical discourse and the society that was evolving at the time when romantic medicine also had its limelight. With that, I conclude my presentation. So, if you we can now have discussion on the explanations that we have made.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karmakar. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And it is truly said by John Keats that a thing of beauty is joy forever. And I am feeling overwhelmed to have all the beautiful participants who are passionate towards literature on this platform. Now, I am sure that the lecture of Dr. Karmakar on John Keats' Poetics through a medical humanities perspective provides us a lot of information. It was such an insightful session by her. I am sure that our participants must have gained new domain of knowledge and perspective, and it would help them as well in the future research activities. Now it's time for question and answer session. And first of all, I will introduce myself to you. I am Zainab, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Khaja Bandanawaz University, Kalaburagi, and the moderator of this session, that is the webinar. So I would like to ask the participant to post the questions in the chat box of the Google Meet. I would request you all to keep the questions short and to the point. So anyone who wants to post any question so that we would get valuable observations of Dr. Karmakar. Anyone who wants to ask question, please drop your question in the chat box of the Google Meet. So we have got one question which is asked by our student Ikra Sultana. The question is, has medical humanities has any impact on had any impact of John Keats language? So, Dr. Karmakar, what's your observation on this question?
Thank you, Sultana, for this question. First of all, medical humanities cannot have any impact on John Keats' language because that discipline, as its form, was not there at the time. But when it comes to the choice of language, as I have rightly stated just before the end of my presentation, that he was very much conscious in the choice of the word and the way the words are structured in order to communicate about the understanding of life and pain, sorrow, death. So he was very much familiar with the knowledge system of his time. So we cannot say that just for poetic pleasure, kids did select those words. Rather, his selection of the word was very much influenced by his scientific perspective about the life form. And one more point that I would like to explain here is that many times you may be knowing that there is also a very interesting book on that that when it comes to kids he is celebrated, but he is also very much to an extent had a very negative portrayal that to what extent kids actually the poem that kids did write at the time was very much influenced by his intellectuality or because of his influence of opium. I believe that many of you know that kids is also a person who was condemned for his usage of opium. So it was said that did he really create the poem? What, or it was in a stage of trance that those poems were created. But I totally negate it because I strongly believe that his usage of words are very conscious. He wanted to communicate a particular notion of life that he was supporting in the cultural context when the debate of life was very significant. So I believe that science did influence his making of his poetry. Um,
Okay. Another question is by Dr. Karthik M. The question is, any modern authors can we connect with medical humanities? So,
authors
what's your take?
when you are talking about authors, yes, um, you can read Michael Mack, you can read when we talk about for example medical humanities and more specifically critical medical humanities, you can Donna McDonnell, you can read a lot of professors who are working in the area of medical humanities from Durham University. So if you go to the Durham University medical humanities page, and be able to find a lot of people, a lot of professors who are actually producing works on medical humanities and its interface with literature.
Another question is by Dr. Yogesh Kashikar. Do medical humanities and critical theory of disability go hands in hands in Keats' poetry?
Do
No,
medical.
Dr. Manali ma'am, Dr. Kashikar here.
Yes, sir. Please tell me.
Uh, Actually, I really congratulate you from the bottom of my heart on your wonderful session, wonderful and informative sessions regarding the humanities, medical humanities, healthcare, and John Keats, the history of John Keats.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
It's really nice to hear you and to talk with you. Uh, I have just an inquiry about the new theory that is coming in the present scenario, that is about the theory of disability, the critical theory of disability.
Hmm.
So disability basically in one or the other way is connected with the medicine and the medical humanity. So
Hmm.
can we find any trace or any clue in the poetry of Keats uh, while can we combine these both aspects in the poetry of John Keats?
Sir, although your voice was breaking, if I'm able to interpret you correctly, you wanted to know whether the critical theories of disability could be applied to kids' poetry or not. Am I correct?
both both at the same time.
Okay, fine, both at the same time. First of all, when it comes to the interpretation, drawing on the critical disability theories in order to interpret the creative works of kids, I suppose we need to be very conscious because kids was actually writing on a particular time right? So his understanding of disability, for example, I'll explain you it in a very more explicit way. For example, when you talk about Shelley's Frankenstein, right? So I also have a paper on it that I have, where I have titled it as a premonition of the bioengineered way. So I have actually used the bioengineering theories or the theory of body as it is emerging in the 21st century in order to understand to what extent Shelley was actually in the same line of thought. So yes, it is possible to draw on 21st century theories in order to interpret a text only if the text supports. We cannot superimpose a critical theory just in order to argue, because as I have said to you, that whenever we are talking about a particular text, right, the text has to be understood from the culture in which it is embedded. So a text is not isolated. If you want to know about a text, if you want to understand on what circumstance, because when you talk about text, right, be it a poetry, be it a novel or anything, it is a cultural artifact produced by a man who was embedded in a particular culture. So whenever we are applying theories, we need to be very, very conscious whether it is superimposed or whether it is
Yeah,
justified
sure,
because the
sure.
text is supporting it.
Yeah, sure, madam. We can have in consideration about the cultures when we consider about the text.
Hmm.
But according to Rola Barthes, the birth of the reader is at the
See,
uh,
sir, death
so
of the author is a
there
totally
will be a
different critical point.
multiple meanings and multiple layers. So once the text is out of the garb of writer, then it has a separate entity itself. So we can even uh, see organize, or we can even see through the lens of the medical humanities and the critical, or see the multiple theories that we have recently. So can we apply the both at the same time? Because I have, you can see my videos on the disability theory and medical humanities on YouTube also. I have a couple of mm, videos on this theory. I
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Yogesh Kashikar. Your voice is breaking and you're not clear in your whatever you are saying. So due to time constraints, we can move to the another questions, I guess,
sure. Okay, okay.
uh, because your voice is not audible.
All I request Dr. Yogesh to type out his question in the chat box, and we can take it up as we answer other people's questions. It's a kind request from us since we are not able to hear him, and I
Sure.
think Dr. Manali is also unable to hear
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
him
struggling
clearly.
actually.
So,
Hmm.
Dr. Yogesh, you're
Okay.
requested to put your
Sure,
question in the
sure,
chat
sure,
box if you
sure.
can be kind enough to do so. Thank you.
Meanwhile, you can proceed with the other questions. Another question is that Dr. J. Josephine Jack. The question is, how might the idea of negative capability be relevant or applied to the field of medical humanities?
Hmm. I believe that thank you for the question. I already have touched upon this issue when I was making my presentation. That when you're talking about negative capability, right, it is actually acknowledging the mystery or the infinity of the knowledge system, and thereby having a kind of humility to understand that you may not be knowing everything. There is something that is uncertain in the very certainty that we are proposing. So, when it comes to your field of medical humanities or health humanities or critical medical humanities, when we are talking about the experientiality, we also want to an extent, accept the certainties with the notion of uncertainty. All right. Uh, yeah, explain accept the notion of certainty with the understanding that there are other knowledge system that we might not be aware of. So when you are talking about negative capability, right, the very concept is actually negating the finite, sorry, the finite understanding of the knowledge, as I said to you, the Newtonian perspective. So when you talk about the Newtonian, it is a very metaphorical perspective where you are talking about a very microscopic understanding of a particular issue. So when it comes to medical humanities also does not support this microscopic understanding. Rather, it emphasizes that there are range of knowledges. It is not knowledge. Rather, there are range of knowledges that are actually residing with us, and we should be aware to accept the fact that we may not be knowing everything. Right, so that actually give, I hope I have explained to you the concept of negative capability and how it may be applied to medical humanities.
Okay, we can take the another question. Another question is by Nikat Parveen. The question is, in what ways can critical medical humanities engage with Keats' exploration of suffering and empathy in his poetry?
In what ways critical medical engage with its exploration of suffering and empathy in poetry? Of course, when you talk about the critical medical humanities, it does take the lens of uh, different critical theories. For example, the notion of suffering, the notion of pain, and how it is defined in itself, and how in that particular culture pain, suffering was conceptualized. So when you are talking about the critical medical humanities, it, as I said to you, the text has to support it. For example, when it comes to Keats, when he's talking about the ode on a Grecian urn, there also beautifully he talks about the very the pain, the not the pain as well as the passion, the combination of pain and passion that is there in the human life. He says that yes, of course, that when you are talking about art, right, art is immortal. It does not have death, so might be it is beautiful. But in contrast to that, when it comes to the human life, it has the monstrosity of accepting the life and death in its togetherness. And thereby, suffering is equivalent to love, and love is equivalent to suffering. So if you love, you have to suffer. And if you suffer, and you are actually emancipating yourself from a very finite understanding that suffering and pain, or pain and pleasure, are two different distinct phenomena. So when you are talking about Keats actually offers all his poem. If you read, you'll be able to see that pain, death, suffering, they are integrally connected to each other. So of course, it could also be it could be very much explained through the lens of critical medical humanities, where you draw on the notion of suffering and how it was conceptualized by Keats, and how it was emerging in a cultural history that we are trying to know through his creative work. Um, I'll just read which important things of Keats' poetry substantiate the influence of classical literature on Keats, madam. Could you please? I am not very much clear about the classical literature here. What do you understand by classical literature? If you could explain it, I would be able to explain it. Because when you are talking about classical, do you talk about the Greco-Roman mythology or romantic literature? I am not very sure. If you could explain, I'll be able to. I will try to explain.
Okay. Next question is by Ekra Sultana. How does the Keats' use of medical knowledge in his poetry illuminate the interplay between science and art?
This I have been highlighting so far, that his very usage of the image of Apollo, right, the Greco-Roman mythological figure, itself talks about this interplay between the arts and science. And through the image of Apollo, he also tries to emphasize on the significance of humanities in the field of medicines. That you cannot do medicine without knowing about the human pain. You need to have a humanitarian heart when you are approaching the medical world. So Greco-Roman, yes, of course. The most important thing is that you just cannot read Keats if you are not very much familiar with the Greco-Roman literature. He has been heavily drawing on Apollo. If you go to Lamia, it is also a mythological figure. It also has a tale behind it. It talks about the unfulfilled love of Lamia, and how he actually transformed from a serpent to a beautiful lady in order to get the love, and how it actually ended in a very tragic note. So I strongly believe that you cannot understand Keats if you are not familiar with the Greco-Roman literature. It's very, very much needed. Means you should be always keeping the Greco-Roman literature in reference when you are trying to understand Keats. What can contemporary healthcare practitioners learn from his poetic duality? That is what that he talks about, right? The very know that life is the very organic concept of the life should be taken into consideration when we are talking about the healthcare practitioners. He is actually Keats is one of the medical practitioners of his time who emphasized on the notion of medical ethics, that we should be prioritizing the human whom you're treating, and you should be approaching the human in a very humanistic way before, and it is not a body that is lying in front of you, rather it is a body that is alive and a body that knows the pain, pleasure, and it's a body that actually have the feelings in itself. So he is a man who deeply emphasized on this very notion of medical ethics. And as I said to you in the very beginning of my presentation, that one of the reasons, and this is also a hypothesis, that why kids did not approach medical world immediately after getting qualified as an apothecary surgeon is that he was very much uncertain about his medical knowledge. He was very much scared about the ambiguity underlying the medical world. So he wants to be ethical in his practice, and that's the reason he says that he cannot approach a world that is so ambiguous. It was very very ambiguous for him, and he was delaying his very entrance to the world. I hope I have responded to all the questions.
Another interesting question is, which I can see here. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We can take the last question, and we will most probably end the session with presidential remarks. But we can take the last question, which is very interesting for us, and hopefully for you too, which is by Kamil Patel. The question is, what can contemporary healthcare practitioner learn from his poetic descriptions?
I have already responded to it, I suppose. In fair, Kamar Patel has also responded to my response.